Day 676 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzy here, and today is a super quick update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So, starting off, we'll take a look at the Russian losses as Russia ends the year on more than 359,000 military personnel losses, which includes another 960 for the past day. And with large numbers like these, it's already been suggested that Russia will likely need 5 to 10 years to rebuild a cohort of trained and experienced military units in order to bring back any former perceived levels of combat effectiveness, or in other words, to rebuild themselves back to a properly functional army. As instead, it's more of a case of untrained, mobilized Russian soldiers being swallowed up by the front lines. Then as for hardware losses, so 8 tanks, 17 APVs, and a fairly whopping 30 artillery, not to mention 48 unarmored vehicles. Then we'll head back across to the map briefly today as Russian air defenses attempted to strike Ukrainian drones that were hitting military targets in the Belgorod Oblast. But it also appeared that since a lot of Russian equipment is underperforming, under-maintained, some Russian missiles malfunctioned and hit directly back into Belgorod instead, as some of the Russian surface-to-air missile launch sites are right next to, if not in, the city of Belgorod itself. And it's not even the first time it's happened at least twice before in this very oblast alone. Then, Russia also reported Ukrainian fire by way of the multiple launch rocket system, the Gradius, stating that Ukraine was using a Czechia or Czech Republic supplied RM-70, aka Vampire multiple rocket launcher, to fire on Belgorod city with. But first of all, the RM-70 Vampire is based on the Soviet Grad BM-21, the 122mm platform, and it has a range of just 20 kilometers, or at very best possibly 30 kilometers when used with some extended range rockets. And yet, the closest distance between Ukraine and Belgorod city is about 40 kilometers. So if we pop up a quick ruler there, see, so yeah, about 40 kilometers there, or about 25 miles. And in fact, likely more when safety placement concerns are taken into consideration for where they choose, so where Ukraine chooses to deploy the Vampires. So it's a bit of a strange statement for Russia to make. Oh, plus, Ukraine is not going to use multiple launch rocket fire to blanket a Russian city with, even if they could. Whereas, fair to say, that's obviously Russia's style instead. But that didn't stop Russia from attempting to summon the Czech Republic representative to the United Nations Security Council to answer for their supply of weapons to Ukraine. So, oh, the audacity of Russia attempting to use the UNSC, so the United Nations Security Council, to control a situation whereby Russia feels its own territory is under threat, even though they cannot notice the obvious hypocrisy in complaining on these matters. Then, just briefly, we'll move to the Russian Bryansk Oblast to the very north there, as it's claimed that the factory of Kremny in the Oblast, which is one of the largest microelectronics enterprises in Russia, has been hit, which, unlike the previous news story, is obviously a good choice of military targets, targeting one's ability to wage war on their adversary. Then we'll move across to the Donbass quite briefly here, so Avdiivka, as while further advances south of Avdiivka stall for Russia, Russia is now mainly putting its efforts on widening the axis of fighting towards Stepova in the north, which is a place that still really continues to see Bradley M2 fire, so usage there onto Russian positions with its 25mm Bushmaster chain gun fire. Most recently, in fact, seen firing into Russian positions in the tree line. Then also, President Zelensky made a surprise visit to Avdiivka, one of the toughest parts of the front lines in Ukraine, where he thanked personally the soldiers at the front of this very embattled city and awarded several of them for exceptional deeds beyond the call of duty. And it's pretty unheard of for leaders of countries at war to be at the front lines like this, and yet I've seen Russian trolls and bots call Zelensky Bunker Boy. Oh, the audacity once again, which is not really surprising given that they always try to flip the script on the narrative. Not to mention that's pretty unbelievable considering that Zelensky has visited the front lines countless times at this point, whereas Putin, not once. Though he did fly into Crimea at one point, then the following night he moved across to Mariupol at about 3 a.m. when everything was dead quiet. But we'll never see him anywhere near close to the chaotic and unorganized Russian front lines that exist. Never. In fact, my hope is that he would actually do this, so he can see the reality of the situation for what it really is on the ground. But not this guy. After all, he is the true bunker boy. Then moving across, so somewhere in the south and east, so starting off in Kherson, as a HIMARS nailed down a Russian self-propelled gun, so the 2S-19 Mr. S SPG, and so specifically with a Ukrainian recon drone keeping an eye on its movements, noticing it parking near a tree setting, then the drone relayed those stationary coordinates back to HIMARS and boom. Then also, somewhere on the wider map, it's been reported quite recently that a Russian Tupolev Tu-22M variant is missing somewhere in Russia. Now, I'm looking forward to getting more information about this one, particularly as this type of aircraft is used for the longer range strikes into Ukraine. And so I'm guessing the overusage of the worn out airframe or failing mechanics had something to do with this event. Then we'll quickly head across to some news for today. So, Ukrainian experts are constantly examining Russian missiles, drones, tanks, and other weapons and equipment. And of the nearly 3,000 components studied, only 14 were produced in Russia, which is quite a considerably poor effort, given that Russia actually waged this war. Oh, and just for the record, the point of this chart is not at all to suggest that, say, the US is supplying weapons to Russia, or any other country for that matter, in this war, which is obviously not the case. It's rather the case that Russia has been relying on foreign componentry as of dual-use nature. Technology over the last many years to create their weapons and other various weapon-related platforms. Which, if anything, actually means it's quite a dangerous proposition for Russia to find itself reliant on other countries in order to wage its war. Especially now even more, with all of the sanctions increasingly being placed on Russia. And as for this type of a news story, I think I've mentioned it before, but well, something similar to it, because it does remind me of back when the USA found a very small generic component in their F-35s that came from China. And so the US freaked out about this, and rightfully so, because who wants to be supplied by their potential enemies or adversaries? In fact, all of this right here on the chart is just yet another example of Russian military corruption at the highest levels. I mean, not even 1% of sourced components for Russia is from Russia themselves. That's just embarrassing. And quite frankly, short-sighted. Then moving across to a super quick and confusing funny to round it all off for today, guys, as it appears that Russian border forces via Telegram have been quite overwhelmed by Ukrainian forces, where these Russians are stationed at the border on the Belgorod Oblast of Russia, stating that the enemy has broken through the border of our homeland. Abrams have been spotted. This is no joke. Which, well, first of all, there is no US M1 Abrams pushing across borders into Russia. I can tell you that right now. And then secondly, also, this is instead clearly a desperate cry for help to Russian command, because the Russian border forces are just like the rest of the Russian army, undermanned, under-equipped, and under everything. I mean, hey, I'd probably be crying wolf too, if I was one of them. And so I'd be stating anything like we've come up against Abrams tanks. Anything to try and get the support they need from the Russian MOD. But one problem, the Russian MOD is way too busy and has way too many simultaneous battles and concerns to worry about to give these guys any attention. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks for watching. Certainly a shorter, quicker video, less in-depth today. It is that kind of a day, isn't it? So we're talking New Year's Eve. So I hope you guys enjoy your New Year's Eve too, and your New Year's Day tomorrow. So thanks again, legends, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers!